The Satanic Verses incident, known as Qissat el-Gharaniq, is the name given to the alleged occasion on which the Islamic prophet Muhammad is blamed to have mistaken the words of satanic suggestion for divine revelation. Narratives involving these alleged verses can be read mostly in works of writers who are considered as hadith fabricators by al-Bukhari, Ahmad ibn Hanbal, al-Shafi'i, Abu Dawud, and all authorities of 6 canonical hadith collections as well. For example, the biographies of Muhammad by al-Waqidi, Ibn Sa'di. The majority of Muslim scholars, however, have rejected the historicity of the incident on the basis of their weak isnads and the incompatibility of the incident with the theological doctrine of Isma. The first use of the expression Satanic Verses is attributed to Sir William Muir. Basic narrative. There are numerous accounts reporting the alleged incident, which differ in the construction and detail of the narrative, but they may be broadly collated to produce a basic account. The different versions of the story are all traceable to one single narrator, Muhammad ibn Ka'b, who was 2 generations removed from biographer Ibn Ishaq. In its essential form, the story reports that Muhammad longed to convert his kinsmen and neighbors of Mecca to Islam. Have ye thought upon al-Lat and al-Uzza and Manat, the third, the other? These are the exalted Gharaniq, whose intercession is hoped for. Alat, al-Uzza and Manat were 3 goddesses worshipped by the Meccans. Discerning the meaning of Gharaniq is difficult, as it is a hapax legomenon. Commentators wrote that it meant the cranes. The Arabic word does generally mean a crane, appearing in the singular as Gharaniq, Gharnuq, Gharnuk and Gharnaik, and the word has cousin forms in other words for birds, including raven, crow, and eagle. Reception in Muslim exegesis. Early Islam. The Satanic Verses incident is reported in the Tafsir and the Sirah Maghazi literature dating from the first 2 centuries of Islam, and is reported in the respective Tafsir corpuses transmitted from almost every Quranic commentator of note in the first 2 centuries of the Hijra. It is generally considered a fabricated incident as the chains of narration are weak. The earliest biography of Muhammad, Ibn Ishaq, is lost, but his collection of traditions survives mainly in 2 sources, Ibn Hisham and al-Tabari. The story appears in al-Tabari, who includes Ibn Ishaq in the chain of transmission, but not in Ibn Hisham. Ibn Sa'di and al-Waqidi, 2 other early biographers of Muhammad, relate the story. Scholars such as Uri Rubin and Shahab Ahmed and Guillaume hold that the report was in Ibn Ishaq, while Alfred T. Welch holds the report has not been presumably present in the Ibn Ishaq later medieval period due to its defective chain of narration. The tradition of the Satanic Verses never made it into any of the canonical hadith compilations. The reference and exegesis about the verses appear in early histories. In addition to appearing in Tabari's Tafsir, it is used in the Tafsirs of Muqatil, Abdur Razak and Ibn Kathir, as well as the Naskh of Abu Ja'far and Naras, the Asbab collection of Wahidi, and even the late medieval As-Suyuti's compilation Al-Dur al-Mantha fil Tafsir bil-Matha. Objections to the incident were raised as early as the 4th Islamic century, such as in the work of An-Naras, and continued to be raised throughout later generations by scholars such as Abu Bakr ibn al-Arabi, Fakhr ad-Din Razi, as well as al-Qurtubi. The most comprehensive argument presented against the factuality of the incident came in Qadi Iyad's Ash-Shifa. The incident was discounted on 2 main bases. The first was that the incident contradicted the doctrine of Isma, divine protection of Muhammad from mistakes. The second was that the descriptions of the chain of transmission extant since that period are not complete in sound. Ibn Kathir points out in his commentary that the various isnads available to him by which the story was transmitted were almost all mursal, or without a companion of Muhammad in their chain. Uri Rubin asserts that there exists a complete version of the isnad continuing to Ibn Abbas, but this only survives in a few sources. He claims that the name of Ibn Abbas was part of the original isnad, and was removed so that the incident could be deprived of its Sahih isnad and discredited. Imam Fakhr al-Din al-Razi, commenting on Surah 2252 in his Tafsir al-Kabir, stated that the people of verification declared the story as an outright fabrication, citing supporting arguments from the Quran, Sunnah and reason. He then reported that the preeminent Muhaddith Ibn Khuzaymah said, "It is an invention of the heretics," when once asked about it. Al-Razi also recorded that al-Bayhaqi stated that the narration of the story was unreliable because its narrators were of questionable integrity. Those scholars who acknowledged the historicity of the incident apparently had a different method for the assessment of reports than that which has become standard Islamic methodology. For example, Ibn Taymiyyah took the position that since Tafsir and Sirah Maghazi reports were commonly transmitted by incomplete isnads, these reports should not be assessed according to the completeness of the chains but rather on the basis of recurrent transmission of common meaning between reports. Al-Qurtubi dismisses all these variants in favor of the explanation that once Surah Al-Najm was safely revealed, the basic events of the incident were now permitted to occur to identify those of his followers who would accept Muhammad's explanation of the blasphemous imposture. Modern Islamic scholarship. While the authors of the Tafsir texts during the first 2 centuries of the Islamic era do not seem to have regarded the tradition as in any way inauspicious or unflattering to Muhammad, it seems to have been universally rejected by at least the 13th century, and most modern Muslims likewise see the tradition as problematic, in the sense that it is viewed as profoundly heretical because, by allowing for the intercession of the 3 pagan female deities, they eroded the authority and omnipotence of Allah. But they also hold damaging implications in regard to the revelation as a whole, for Muhammad's revelation appears to have been based on his desire to soften the threat to the deities of the people. Different responses have developed concerning the account. Almost all modern Muslim scholars have rejected the story. Arguments for rejection are found in Muhammad Abji's article, Marsalat al-Gharaniq wa Tafsir al-Ayat, Muhammad Hussein Hakel's Hayat Muhammad, Saeed Qutb's Faisal al-Quran, Abul Ala Mawjudi's Tafhim al-Quran, and Muhammad Nazir Uddin al-Albani's Nasb al-Majaniq li Nasf al-Gharaniq. Hakel points out the many forms and versions of the story and their inconsistencies and argues that the contextual flow of Surah Al-Najm does not allow at all the inclusion of such verses as the story claims. Hakel quotes Muhammad Abji, who pointed out that the Arabs have nowhere described their gods in such terms as al-Gharaniq. Neither in the poetry nor in their speeches or traditions do we find their gods or goddesses described in such terms. Rather, the word al-Gharaniq or al-Gharaniq was the name of a black or white water bird, sometimes given figuratively to the handsome blonde youth. Lastly, Hakel argues that the story is inconsistent with Muhammad's personal life and is completely against the spirit of the Islamic message. Aqa Mahdi Puya has said that these fake verses were shouted out by the Meccans to make it look like it was Muhammad who said it. He writes, "Some pagans and hypocrites planned secretly to recite words praising idolatry alongside the recitation of the Holy Prophet while he was praying, in such a way that the people would think as if they were recited by him. Once when the Holy Prophet was reciting verses 19 and 20 of Najm, one of the pagans recited, Tilkal Garani al-Ula wa Inishafaratahum al-Latoya. Verily their intercession is sought after. As soon as this was recited, the conspirators shouted in delight to make the people believe that it was the Holy Prophet who said these words. Here, the Quran is stating the general pattern the enemies of the messengers of Allah followed when they were positively convinced that the people were paying attention to the teachings of the messengers of Allah and sincerely believing in them. They would mix their false doctrines with the original teachings so as to make the divine message a bundle of contradictions. This kind of satanic insertions are referred to in this verse, and it is supported by Hamim 26. It is sheer blasphemy to say that satanic forces can influence the messengers of Allah. This entire matter was a mere footnote to the back and forth of religious debate, and was rekindled only when Salman Rushdie's 1988 novel, The Satanic Verses, made headline news. The novel contains some fictionalized allusions to Islamic history, which provoked both controversy and outrage. Muslims around the world protested the book's publishing, and Iran's Ayatollah Khomeini issued a fatwa sentencing Rushdie to death, saying that the book blasphemed Muhammad and his wives. Historicity debate. Since William Muir, the historicity of this episode has been largely accepted by Orientalists. Some Orientalists, however, argued against the historic authenticity of these verses on various grounds. William Montgomery Watt and Alfred Guillaume claim that stories of the event were true based upon the implausibility of Muslims fabricating a story so unflattering to their prophet. Muhammad must have publicly recited the satanic verses as part of the Quran. It is unthinkable that the story could have been invented by Muslims or foisted upon him by non-Muslims. Truderellatin Encyclopedia of Islam finds Watt's reason to be insufficient, stating, the story in its present form cannot be accepted as historical for a variety of reasons. Regarding this argument, Shahab Ahmed in the Encyclopedia of the Quran counters that the widespread acceptance of the incident by early Muslims suggests, however, that they did not view the incident as inauspicious and that they would presumably not have, on this basis at least, been adverse to inventing it. Similarly, Alfred T. Welch, in the Encyclopedia of Islam, argues that the implausibility argument alone would be insufficient to assert the tradition's authenticity. He says that the story in its present form is certainly a later, exegetical fabrication despite the fact that there could be some historical basis for the story. Welch states that the story falsely claims that the chapter 53 to 1-20 and the end of the chapter are a unity, and that the date for the verse 22:52 is later than 53 to 21-7, and almost certainly belongs to the Medinan period. Further, several details in the setting of the story, such as the mosque and the sajda, do not belong to the Meccan phase of Muhammad's career. Welch also points out that the story was not mentioned in the Ibn Ishaq's biography of Muhammad. He says that the above analysis does not rule out the possibility of some historical kernel behind the story. One such possibility, Welch says, is that the story is of a historical telescoping nature, that a situation that was known by Muhammad's contemporaries to have lasted for a long period of time later came to be encapsulated in a story that restricts his acceptance of intercession through these goddesses to a brief period of time and places the responsibility for this departure from a strict monotheism on Satan. John Burton argued for its fictitiousness based upon a demonstration of its actual utility to certain elements of the Muslim community, namely, those legal exegetes seeking an occasion of revelation for eradicative modes of abrogation. Burton supports his theory by the fact that Tabari does not discuss the story in his exegesis of the verse 53 to 20, but rather in 22:52. Burton further notes that different versions of the story are all traceable to one single narrator, Muhammad ibn Ka'b, 2 generations removed from Ibn Ishaq, but not contemporary with the event. G.R. Horting writes that the Satanic Verses incident would not serve to justify or exemplify a theory that God reveals something and later replaces it himself with another true revelation. Burton, in his rejection of the authenticity of the story, sided with Leon Katana, who wrote that the story was to be rejected not only on the basis of isnad, but because, had these hadiths even a degree of historical basis, Muhammad's reported conduct on this occasion would have given a lie to the whole of his previous prophetic activity. Maxime Rodinson finds that it may reasonably be accepted as true, because the makers of Muslim tradition would never have invented a story with such damaging implications for the revelation as a whole. He writes the following on the genesis of the verses. Obviously, Muhammad's unconscious had suggested to him a formula which provided a practical road to unanimity. Rodinson writes that this concession, however, diminished the threat of the Last Judgment by enabling the three goddesses to intercede for sinners and save them from eternal damnation. Further, it diminished Muhammad's own authority by giving the priests of Uzza, Manat, and Alat the ability to pronounce oracles contradicting his message. Disparagement from Christians and Jews who pointed out that he was reverting to his pagan beginnings, and rebelliousness and indignation from among his own followers influenced him to go back on his revelation. However, in doing so he denounced the gods of Mecca as lesser spirits or mere names, cast off everything related to their traditional religion as the work of pagans and unbelievers, and consigned the Meccans' pious ancestors and relatives to hell. This was the final break with the Quraysh. Fred Halliday states that rather than having damaging implications, the story is a cautionary tale, the point of which is not to malign God but to point out the frailty of human beings, and that even a prophet may be misled by Shaitan, though ultimately Shaitan is unsuccessful. Since John Wansborough's contributions to the field in the early 1970s, though, scholars have become much more attentive to the emergent nature of early Islam, and less willing to accept back-projected claims of continuity. To those who see the tradition as constantly evolving and supplying answers to questions that it itself has raised, the argument that there would be no reason to develop and transmit material which seems derogatory of the Prophet or of Islam is too simple. For one thing, ideas about what is derogatory may change over time. We know that the doctrine of the Prophet's infallibility and impeccability emerged only slowly. For another, material which we now find in the biography of the Prophet originated in various circumstances to meet various needs, and one has to understand why material exists before one can make a judgment about its basis in fact. In Rubin's recent contribution to the debate, questions of historicity are completely eschewed in favor of an examination of internal textual dynamics and what they reveal about early medieval Islam. Rubin claims to have located the genesis of many prophetic traditions and that they show an early Muslim desire to prove to other scriptures that Muhammad did indeed belong to the same exclusive predestined chain of prophets in whom the Jews and the Christians believed. He alleges that the Muslims had to establish the story of Muhammad's life on the same literary patterns as were used in the vitae of the other prophets. The incident of the Satanic Verses, according to him, conforms to the common theme of persecution followed by isolation of the prophet figure. As the story was adapted to include Quranic material, the idea of satanic temptation was claimed to have been added, heightening its inherent drama as well as incorporating additional biblical motifs. Rubin gives his attention to the narratological exigencies which may have shaped early Sirah material as opposed to more commonly considered ones of dogma, sect, or political, dynastic faction. Given the consensus that the most archaic layer of the biography is that of the stories of the Qusas, i.e., popular storytellers, this may prove a fruitful line of inquiry. Although there could be some historical basis for the story, in its present form it is certainly a later, exegetical fabrication. Surah Lii 1-20 and the end of the surah are not a unity, as is claimed by the story. 22:52 is later than Lii 21-7, and is almost certainly Medinan, and several details of the story, the mosque, the sajda, and others not mentioned in the short summary above, do not belong to the Meccan phase. Rubin also claimed that the supposed temporary control taken by Satan over Muhammad made such traditions unacceptable to early hadith compilers. which he believed to be a unique case in which a group of traditions are rejected only after being subject to Quranic models, and as a direct result of this adjustment,